Hello and welcome. Let's talk about Disney Lorcana Set 4, Ursula's Return. Now that we've seen all the cards from this exciting new set and had some time to think them over, I'm ready to get cooking on some new decks. But first, today's video will cover my top 10 cards of Set 4. Now there are a lot of options to consider for a top 10 list, from powerful legendary cards to new Floodborn characters with alternate shift costs, and even exciting sing-together songs with impressive effects. I've taken a look at everything and considered both existing meta deck updates, as well as any brand new strategies. Now my first impressions could be a bit off, as I certainly expect things to shift around over the next few weeks, but I think this list will be a great place to start in Ursula's Return. And even though this will ultimately be a top 10, I'll be starting off with a section of honorable mentions. I think any number of these cards could jump into the top 10, but some are more situational or perhaps too difficult to gauge their strength just yet. Anyways, you get the point. Let's jump into those honorable mentions and then get to our top 10. Let's dive in. First up, in no particular order, one of the most exciting additions to this set are more self-damage cards in Ruby, like Beast Wounded. A 3-cost 2/6 with 2 lore is very nice, especially if you can heal off that damage with Amber or Sapphire cards. And he's clearly a great backup to Mother Gothel as they set up for Rapunzel. With her on turn 2 and Beast on turn 3, our turn 4 Rapunzel suddenly becomes that much more consistent. Mulan Injured Soldier is another new self-damage addition, and she also pairs well with Rapunzel for the same exact reasons. In fact, for 5 ink, you can play them both out easily on the same turn to draw 2 cards. So she's going to be an instant staple in Amber Ruby decks. Mulan is also important because of her new Floodborn counterpart, but we'll be covering that later. Sticking with the Amber Ruby healing themes here, Julieta Madrigal, Excellent Cook, is a great new character, and she just barely doesn't hit my top 10. She's here to heal 2 damage from any chosen character on turn 3, which draws you a card. Again, this adds consistency for any deck that wants to play Rapunzel, as this Excellent Cook joins in as a backup card draw healer. Gaston Despicable Dealer is another new Amber character that I like a lot. He provides similar character ramp to a turn 3 dock. In this case, he's a turn 3 uninkable though, although on the next turn you can exert Gaston to pay 2 less ink for the next character played. So on turn 4 you can play characters for a total ink cost of 6. Again, this adds power to Amber Ruby combos, enabling more flexibility with an early Rapunzel, healing damaged Ruby characters easily as you play them out cheaper with Gaston. But another simple combo with this ink pairing is that Gaston allows a turn 4 Lady Tremaine or Madame Medusa. Not too shabby. Between Julieta and Gaston, these are my top 2 picks for Amber cards this set. And that does mean the Amber ink won't be getting into the top 10 sadly, as I think it definitely got the short end of the paintbrush this set. That being said, I should probably cover Singer 7 Ariel and Singer 9 Cinderella real quick, as I suspect they'll be getting a lot of attention as a pair of shiny new Amber cards. So Ariel Singing Mermaid is a 4-cost character that can sing 7-cost songs, and Cinderella Melody Weaver is a 5-cost character who can sing 9-cost songs. I could definitely be wrong here, but they just don't seem all that impactful to me. I suspect these singers will simply live or die depending on the strength of the high-cost sing-together songs, but with those high costs, and many of them being uninkable, they're quite clunky to play even with Ariel or Cinderella here to help. These 2 could surprise me, but for now, they're simply worth discussing and keeping an eye on, but nothing too powerful in my opinion. Similar to Amber, there aren't a ton of top cards in Amethyst this set, but one of the stronger ones is Ursula Sea Witch Queen. She doesn't quite make my top 10, but this is definitely a card to look out for. Unlike the previous Amethyst legendary Ursula from set 1, our Sea Witch here is resistant to the immediate banishment from Madame Medusa, which is nice. She does cost 7 ink, just like before, but is inkable this time and can shift in for 5 ink. She imposes that same 3 lore threat, but instead of drawing a card, she provides some utility by exerting opposing characters when she quests and preventing all other characters, including your own, from singing songs. I think this is a fun new legendary, but not quite strong enough to break into my top 10, as I can't see her as a mandatory pick for any top decks. Next is Lumiere Fiery Friend. This is such a good addition to Lorcana, as his strength boost across the board really enables so many different cards. Even just in Ruby alone, I think of Maui, who would love to rush in for 7 strength to take down a castle, and Lumiere is great in the mirror match against other Ruby decks, protecting anything with 3 strength from Madame Medusa. And I suppose he also protects from Lady Tremaine just by adding a second target on the board. Not bad. Another strong Ruby card is Sisu Emboldened Warrior. This is a new 3-cost character in Ruby who becomes stronger if your opponent has a full hand of cards. Again, this is a pretty straightforward character that enables a few different playstyles. She can simply quest for 2 lore and is likely to take down anyone swinging in to remove her. But that strength can also be used defensively too, taking out opposing characters or busting down early locations with ease. Now obviously she does better if your opponent has a ton of cards in hand, so I suppose that's not really a scenario you want to be in the first place, but I still like this card a lot and expect it to see some play. Cricky Lucky Cricket is next. We have yet another 5-cost 3-lore character in Emerald here, and his 4 willpower makes him a bit more resilient compared to Ray or Bell Hidden Archer, and that 3 strength boost is a welcome bonus that makes him stand out in that crowd of 5-cost Emerald threats. Not only will this strength boost function similarly to Merlin Crab, which is a solid card, but I suppose Cricky could also work alongside other Emerald cards like Pete. Definitely an interesting new character. Another very interesting Emerald card in Set 4 is Hidden Inkcaster. This item is really neat as it changes a fundamental game rule, and I love cards that bend and break the norm because they can lead to some creative decks with fresh playstyles. This one is definitely kind of spicy, especially in Emerald, but I'm hesitant to rank it super high because it involves some major risk to play. Using this means you'll be playing a lot of uninkables in your deck, or at least a bit more than usual, so you have to find this card early, otherwise it could be bad news. A very fun new item though, and certainly worth mentioning. Vitalisphere is another item, this time in Ruby. Essentially, you can pay 2 ink to give a character rush plus 2 strength for the turn. This will work wonderfully for any deck that wants to challenge suddenly, and there is a lot more focus on lore via challenging in this set. But what really makes this item noteworthy is that it's a 1-cost inkable item, so it's in consideration for a Ruby Sapphire item deck. Speaking of items, Glean is a fun new Sapphire action that has some scary item-focused lore gaining potential. For 1 ink, banish a chosen item and its owner gains 2 lore. I think in particular, a Sapphire Steel items deck would love to draw into a couple of these later on, right after a whole new world. With a few cheap items and a few of these, that lore gain can get very dangerous very quick. Another new Sapphire card is the Queen Divinaire. She's here to help us scout out some of those Sapphire items. Now thankfully her ability isn't a when played effect, or this card would likely be way too powerful. The fact that she has to hit the board and wait a turn to use it is a good drawback, which actually reminds me of the Queen from Set 1 that exerts to draw a card. This is a solid new character for sure, but there's an even better version of this that's coming up later that's just an uncommon card, not even a legendary, so we'll be getting to that in a bit. I'll wrap up Sapphire for now with Prince Philip Gallant Defender. I think this is a severely overlooked card right now. All of the Prince Philip cards are a bit wonky, both the new ones and the Set 1 Prince Philip, which I don't think has ever been played. But this one here has real potential, I think. As an inkable 3-cost 1/3 with 2 lore, his stats are alright. Now of course he can only add 1 strength to another character when he uses his support, but it's that +1 resist that really matters, not the 1 strength. I think Philip is uniquely made to support a questing character, not a challenging one. Or perhaps he supports and adds resist to a bodyguard who's protecting Prince Philip himself, allowing him to quest a bit safer. Maybe I'm wrong here, but I think this is better than it seems at a glance. In contrast, Diablo Devoted Herald is likely to be a popular pick right off the bat. He's bound to quest or sing each turn safely as an evasive, and whenever your opponent draws a card while he's exerted, you also draw a card. I think this is a really solid new character, all things considered. Now he can shift in on the new 1-cost Diablo by discarding an action, but he's only a 3-cost himself, so he'll probably just be played out normally. Perhaps on turn 3 right after a Bucky for some classic Bucky Floodborn discard synergy. Let's stick with the evasive Emerald Floodborn characters and talk about Pegasus Cloud Chaser. This is a really good character, deserving of an honorable mention for sure, along with our small Pegasus by the way. He also gets a nod because a turn 1 evasive is always going to be pretty solid. Against certain decks, you can expect to gain 2 to 3, maybe even more lore just from playing him out on turn 1. But he also can shift into Pegasus Cloud Racer, which is really nice. He shifts for 3 ink into this 5-cost Pegasus, protecting whatever you play out on turn 2 by turning your characters evasive, then questing for 2 himself or singing a valuable 5-cost or less song. Pegasus can certainly be used defensively to take down opposing evasives with your other characters, but I have to imagine the primary use here is protecting your own units in play in the classic Emerald aggro fashion. Next up, Yin Sid, Powerful Sorcerer, finally joins Lorcana, and I think this legendary character might finally be what we need to enable a strong Broom deck. It's still certainly unclear just how powerful this deck archetype could be, but Yin Sid is definitely a card to look out for as everything on him looks pretty nice, from the cost and stats down to both of his useful and relevant abilities. Alright, just a few more cards to go for the honorable mentions here before we get into the top 10. Flynn Rider Frenemy is another Ruby character to keep an eye on. He works great with a lot of high-strength Ruby characters like Maui, Scar, and the Sisu Emboldened Warrior we saw earlier. He won't always be able to grant that bonus lore, but when he does, it's 3 lore, plus the one he can quest for on his own. So this Flynn might just be worth splashing into some Ruby decks this set. Ariel Sonic Warrior is a fun new steel character. She enables song-driven damage in steel, which makes a lot of sense. And that 8 willpower is very nice, especially as early as turn 4 if you shift her into battle. Unfortunately, once again, there's a card called Madame Medusa that doesn't care one bit about your willpower, just your 3 or less strength. But even so, on the upside, this Ariel has a lot of potential in song decks, and she has decent shift targets in Ruby and Steel, plus a fantastic shift target in Amber, of course. Another honorable mention is the Ruby song Be King Undisputed. Just think about how good Lady Tremaine is in Ruby. Now imagine that a couple turns earlier, taking down some pesky aggro characters. But this song is also impactful later in the game when you can often control the board state and set up a solo opposing character to hit. 2 of these songs, or one of these plus Lady Tremaine, can also simply wipe out any board of 2 characters, and as a bonus, this is a song that can be sung for free. Very valuable indeed. Alright, now our final honorable mention of the video is Thebes the Big Olive. Out of all the new locations in set 4, this is my pick for the strongest one. And honestly, I might be way off on that statement, but the other locations don't seem all that crazy to me. Some of them are good, but this is the one that's worth mentioning, I think. This steel location is going to further enable some challenge decks out there, and I think this could be the Lorcana set where we finally see a deck of that nature break into the meta in a meaningful way. And if we do, I think Thebes could be an important catalyst for making that happen. Alright, hopefully that lengthy list was okay to include. There are just so many cards worth covering, I think, especially in a top 10 conversation, which is a good thing for sure. But now it's time to look at my top 10 cards from Disney Lorcana Ursula's Return. Starting off our list, number 10 is none other than Hey Hey Clumsy Rooster. That's right, Hey Hey squeezes into my top 10 cards, and this might be a surprising one. I'm not sure it's had too many eyes on it so far, but I'm willing to include it here as a great underrated pick in set 4. Hey Hey is a 3-cost Inkable Emerald character with 2 strength, 3 willpower, and 2 lore. But Hey Hey's ability is where he shines. When you play him, if an opponent has more cards in their Inkwell than you may place the top card of your deck onto your Inkwell Exerted. There's a few things that are really interesting about this card. At its core, Hey Hey is an Inkable 3-cost Emerald card with 2 lore, so he's automatically a decent card in any Emerald aggro deck, comparable to some other new cards like Hera, Pain, and Jacques, which he certainly outclasses, but he's also similar to our set 1 Cheshire Cat. But really, in some ways, Hey Hey is more of a turn 4 character because of his ability. As mentioned, when you play him, you can ink off the top of your deck if you have less ink than your opponent. So Hey Hey provides conditional ink ramp in Emerald, which is the first time we've seen it at all outside of Sapphire. But why is he in the top 10? Well, I think this card unlocks some great potential for Emerald. Without much native card draw, inking off the top of the deck is really valuable. And with the condition being your opponent being ahead in ink, playing Hey Hey is a guaranteed ink when played on turn 4 on the draw. That's really nice when playing from behind. It can bump you up to 4 ink, and then you can ink up to 5 if needed, or go up to 6 on the next turn. But you could just stay at 4 or 5 ink for the top end of your aggro deck without having to commit a card for ink. That sounds kind of anticlimactic, but I think it's really an efficient way to keep up the tempo in Emerald. Even outside of turn 4, you can get this ability off even easier later in the game, or perhaps sooner against a Sapphire deck. And there's really no downside here, even in a situation where you can't make use of his ability, which could be often. Hey Hey is still a great 3-cost 2 lore character, or you can simply use him as ink himself. Looking at this character a bit more broadly, this isn't a card that's gonna take over a game completely or become a win condition for a deck, and that's one reason why he's only number 10 on the list. But I am excited to try him out, and I think he's a very welcome addition to Emerald in Set 4. Next up, at number 9, we have my favorite Amethyst card of Ursula's Return, Bruno Madrigal Undetected Uncle. Bruno is a 4-cost inkable Amethyst character with 3 strength, 3 willpower, and 1 lore, as well as the evasive keyword. His traits are Storyborn, Ally, and Madrigal, which means he will be able to make use of Mirabelle's lore boost to each Madrigal character, but Bruno has little need for that combo as he'll be able to gain plenty of lore off his own built-in ability. Bruno can exert to reveal the top card of your deck once you've named it. Then, if you manage to guess correctly, you add that card to your hand and gain 3 lore. Otherwise, it returns to the top of your deck. That's a pretty fun ability, and Amethyst has always had great tools for scouting out the top of your deck. And that's where this lore gathering potential from Bruno really begins to shine. There's an abundance of options for peeking at that top card. You can utilize Yzma, Ursula's Cauldron, the Sorcerer's Hat, and especially the Boss is on a roll to set up Bruno for success. Even the scarcely used 1-cost Song Reflection or the 2-cost Merlin Squirrel can provide some value in a Bruno-focused deck. Now, I'm not certain just how successful a Bruno deck can be, but everything he has going on is really good on paper. He's inkable, he's evasive, he gives 3 lore each turn if you know that top card, and don't overlook the fact that you can do this multiple times per turn if you can ready Bruno. Ruby comes to mind with Fan the Flames, Shield of Virtue, and LeFou Instigator. And on top of all this, if you do name the right card, Bruno also just draws the card off the top for you. I mean, I suppose he has to do that, otherwise you could just ready him and just name that same card again. But hey, the ability could have made us discard the card or something, so the fact that you draw it into your hand is just the cherry on top. Look forward to a Bruno deck video coming out this set because I'll definitely be experimenting with this one quite a bit. That all being said, it's time to move on now because we don't talk about Bruno. No, literally, we don't talk about Bruno. Next up, we have the much anticipated Emerald song about Bruno and not talking about him. This is an inkable 5-cost song, which we all know is the magic number for song costs in Lorcana. We Don't Talk About Bruno is pretty much an exact combination of Mother Knows Best and Sudden Chill, 2 great songs in Emerald already. When played or sung, this card returns a chosen character to their player's hand, and then that player discards a card from their hand at random. Those are both great effects, so it's easy to see why this card has value, especially when you consider all the 5-cost characters, Floodborn or otherwise, that can sing this song. A few that come to mind are Lucifer or our new Pegasus Cloud Racer in Emerald, but there are of course many great 5-cost song singers across ink colors, such as Champion Robin Hood or Beast Tragic Hero in Steel, or the Floodborn Queen or Ariel Singer 3 in Amber. All of these singer options really do make We Don't Talk About Bruno a flexible pick across different decks. In particular, this song is a great option in discard decks, of course, but it's also simply a great tempo card or aggro defense tool like Mother Knows Best or Kit Cloudkicker. A great new song indeed, but at this point I've definitely talked way too much about Bruno. Next up at number 7, we have a strong new Ruby character. This is Sisu Daring Visitor. If you liked how Kit Cloudkicker was a mini version of Genie, then you may appreciate Sisu here as the mini version of Madame Medusa, which might also immediately explain why this card makes it into our top 10 here. Sisu is a 3-cost uninkable Ruby character with 1 strength, 1 willpower, and 1 lore. But alongside those stats, she has a few traits including Hero and Dragon, as well as the evasive keyword. And of course, her ability is where we find the value. When you play Sisu, you banish an opposing character with 1 strength or less. So starting on turn 3 or later, she's able to take out some key 1-strength threats all on her own right when she's played out. Plus, Sisu can always be paired with bounce effects from Amethyst or even Emerald to double down on that powerful ability. There's not much else to say here, this is a really good card. And if you're still unsure, let's just have a moment of silence for the following relevant 1-strength characters. Moving on now from that menace of a Ruby card and straight into another, we have Brawl here at number 6. Very similar to Sisu, this is a 3-cost Ruby action that allows you to banish a chosen character with 2 or less strength. Okay then, I guess we're gonna have to do that montage again, but also add to the end of it all the relevant characters with 2 strength or less, which, spoiler alert, is a lot of good cards. Alright, okay, so Brawl can take down all of those characters. And since Ruby is a color that can struggle a bit in the early game, the addition of Brawl is a welcome sight for Ruby players, even if it is a very simple card. I have a feeling Brawl will be a very popular pick. Next up, at number 5, we have Steel Popsicle. No, but really, Fortisphere is my pick for number 5, and this is pretty much a Steel Popsicle at the end of the day. It's a 1-cost inkable steel item that draws a card when it's played. It does have a second ability. You can spend 1 ink and banish Fortisphere to give a character of yours bodyguard until the next turn. And this can be pretty impactful, likely much better than the Popsicle heal effect in many scenarios. But the reason why I call this a Steel Popsicle is because its true strength is that it simply provides another 4 copies of a 1-cost item that can replace itself, making it a great backup for Popsicle for Flaversham. Because of this, I do suspect it may be used sparingly outside of a Sapphire item deck, as Flaversham is important for unlocking its full potential. Similarly, Fortisphere also enjoys working with Judy, Tamatoa, and some new cards like Glean and Scuttle. So you can see why this card is primarily a new piece in a Sapphire Steel list. Now, objectively, this card is a bit plain. It doesn't do all that much on its own, so it's somewhat boring to me. But inside all of that context of it being paired with Sapphire, I have no doubt Fortisphere will shine bright and be a very impactful card. Next up, at number 4, we're going to return back to Ruby and talk about an exciting new legendary Floodborn card, Mulan Elite Archer. This is a 6-cost inkable Ruby character with 2 strength, 6 willpower, and 2 lore. This Floodborn hero princess can also shift onto another Mulan card for only 5 ink, which is the smallest discount possible, but there's a good reason. She gets a nice little bonus for shifting into battle. Her first ability grants her +3 strength when she does so, bumping her up to a 5/6 stat line. Mulan also has a few shift targets with cards in Steel, Amber, and a few in Ruby, including the new 1 and 2-cost Mulans, which might be the best targets, or at least the natural ones being in Ruby, especially our 1-cost Mulan Injured Soldier. But why is Mulan so strong up here at number 4? Well, her second ability, Triple Shot, says, during your turn, whenever she deals damage to another character in a challenge, deal that same amount of damage to up to 2 other chosen characters. This is simply a ton of damage, 5 going towards 3 different characters if you challenge the turn she shifts in. That's a total of 15 effective damage coming in hot as Mulan shifts into battle. Plus, every turn after that, assuming she's able to stick around, she can still deal 2 damage to 3 different characters. Really, I think Elite Archer Mulan just reminds me of the classic Giant Tinkerbell from Set 1, shifting in and shaking things up with some strong damage spread. And sometimes that level of raw power is all it takes to make a card great. I think we'll be seeing a lot of Mulan this set, as she's an easy inclusion across many decks, a consideration for Ruby paired with Amethyst, Amber, Steel, and perhaps even Sapphire and Emerald. So make sure you're ready. Now we're going to break into the top 3 with the incredible Scuttle Expert on Humans. It's wild, but Scuttle is as close as it gets to a perfect card in Lorcana. This is a 2-cost inkable Sapphire character with 1 strength, 3 willpower, and 1 lore. His ability says when you play Scuttle, look at the top 4 cards of your deck. Reveal an item and put it into your hand, with the rest returned to the bottom of your deck in any order. So let's break down this card. Scuttle comes out quickly on turn 2, and has decent stats for a character with a strong ability. He then lets you scout 4 cards for an item. This is a very welcome enabling card for any Sapphire item deck. Scuttle can be used to find a Popsicle or other cheap item which can hit the board on turn 3, ready for the turn 4 Flaversham to banish it for card draw. But at turn 2, Scuttle can also help you find that ever important Fishbone Quill for your turn 3. Honestly, this alone makes Scuttle pretty much an auto-include into any Sapphire deck that must get that early ramp off for their plan to work. In other words, every single viable Sapphire deck. Most notably, Scuttle is going to be great in our existing Ruby Sapphire and Ruby Steel item decks, But I think Emerald, Amber, and Amethyst have more potential than ever to be paired with Sapphire in Set 4. And part of that is because of more consistency found with cards like Scuttle. One major reason why I value him so highly is that our existing Sapphire decks, whether it be the late game control of Ruby or the whole new world combo decks of Steel, they've always had a pretty underwhelming or even non-existent 2-cost character slot. This means that Scuttle fits right into a spot that's already pretty uncontested, all while accomplishing exactly what you want in an item deck, some much needed consistency. So much so that he earns a spot in my top 3 today. Of course, the meta could shift away from that style of Sapphire deck, but if it doesn't, and I don't suspect it will, Scuttle is going to be a new staple in Sapphire. He's not necessarily a game changer or game winning bomb of a character, but I highly value the consistency Scuttle brings to the table, and I think he's going to be a big contributor to the success of existing item decks and new lists that are unlocked this set. Now we're on to our number 2 card, which is none other than Philoctetes' No-Nonsense Instructor. This is a 4-cost inkable steel character with 2 strength, 3 willpower, and 2 lore. Phil, of course, is here to enable and empower your heroes, as he's the best trainer of heroes around. Therefore, he provides a permanent +1 challenge bonus to all your hero characters, but really his second ability is where the magic is. Whenever you play a hero character, you gain 1 lore, and oh boy is this a strong ability. We all know how powerful alternative lore gaining cards can be. From Sleepy's Flute and Merlin Goat to Lucky Dime, these are some of the most powerful cards in Lorcana. And Phil joins their ranks as a lore generation card that's worthy of building around. The reason why is that there's such an abundance of great hero cards in Lorcana. In fact, there's well over 200 character cards in Lorcana with that hero trait. Yes, I actually went and checked. It's funny, you could make an entire set of Lorcana out of our existing hero characters and have plenty to spare. This ultimately means that building a deck around Phil to make use of his hero lore gain 100% of the time is actually quite easy. Because of all the heroes, building an all-hero deck doesn't even require you to change up your characters all that much from what you'd normally play. Some of the all-time best characters in Lorcana are heroes. Cards like Maui, Surfer Mini, Flynn Rider, Pinocchio, Rapunzel, Cinderella, Mickey, Robin Hood, Beast, and many, many more are all heroes. So not only is it easy to build a specific hero deck for Phil as a primary strategy, it's fairly easy to slot him into a deck as a secondary lore threat as well. And that's really what makes him so good and likely meta-defining. And because of all those different heroes ready to combo with Phil, he really doesn't have any direct counters to him, other than the obvious counter of just taking him down whenever you see him. Now, if you do want to build around Phil, I think he thrives in a deck with a lot of 1 or 2 cost hero characters. Just think about this, if you can get up to 7 or 8 ink, which isn't all that difficult, you can gain 4 lore suddenly on your turn by playing out Phil plus a few low-cost heroes. And that's assuming you have to play out Phil from your hand and he's not already ready to go on the field. Now, this type of combo does require you to play all those cards from your hand, which means you'll need them in your hand and the card draw to fuel that sort of combo. But playing Phil means you're already playing Steel, so utilizing a whole new world to get that fresh hand is quite natural. But even beyond Steel, Phil easily pairs with Sapphire to ramp into those explosive turns, but he also works incredibly well with Amber, which is the master of playing out small heroes repeatedly via Rockstar Stitch. So if you've always loved the go wide style decks that want to flood the board with several characters, Phil is a way to make those decks absolutely deadly. And as I said earlier, he's also easy to splash into most Steel decks, and I think that's where we're really going to see him thrive. I think Phil is likely going to be a card that defines the playstyle, timing, and cadence of Set 4, and that's why he's up here near the top of my list today. And finally, the number 1 card of Set 4, according to me at least, is of course Goofy Super Goof. Goofy is a 4-cost inkable Ruby character with 2 strength, 4 willpower, and 1 lore. He's a Storyborn hero with Rush, plus he has a superpower. Goofy gains 2 lore whenever he challenges another character. Now, we've seen some abilities like this. There's Outlaw Aladdin and Champion Robin Hood who gain lore when they banish a foe. And there's Shere Khan who extends a similar ability across all your characters. But Super Goof gains 2 lore whenever he challenges another character, while also providing his own Rush keyword, which is really the difference maker here. Previous lore gained via challenge type abilities were reliant on a few things, either combining Shere Khan with a second card, or combining a card like Aladdin with Pocket Watch back in set 1 so he could rush in suddenly. But with Goofy Super Goof, having that rush natively, plus being able to be played out for only 4 ink, means that on most turns he can rush out for 2 lore right away, surviving a lot of the time too thanks to his 4 willpower. So let's just brainstorm for a second here. Goofy gains 2 lore on your turn for 4 ink. That seems an awful lot like another high tier card we've all grown to love or hate. Merlin Goat also gains lore for 4 ink, and if bounced back for a bit more ink, he gains you 2 lore per turn he's used. The key there is his ability to bounce in or out of play. Well, just like Merlin Goat, Super Goof loves being bounced with Snake or Fox, or even Bounce or Bippity Boppity Boo to repeat his power. But even without any bounce cards, Goofy can gain that 2 lore right away on his own. As long as there's an enemy to be challenged, of course. Or better yet, we are in Ruby, so we can simply turn Goofy with LeFou or Shield of Virtue to gain 4 lore right away on the same turn. Heck, for 12 ink, you could play Goofy, rush in, play LeFou for another challenge, and if Goofy is still up and fighting, play a Snake to bounce Goofy back, and then play him out again for the final 4 ink. This does require 12 ink and some sideways enemies, of course, but that's just the dream scenario where you gain 6 lore on 1 turn. Goofy can accomplish half of that and still be really good. In fact, I think he is good because he has the flexibility to shine within so many flexible lines. And that previous scenario was just a testament to his combo potential. Like any top tier card, Goofy works well across ink pairings, likely finding a home in many different Ruby decks. Playing Goofy with Amethyst, Amber, and Steel are no-brainers, but Sapphire and even Emerald seem pretty good as well. This is definitely one of those cards that's going to define this moment in the game of Lorcana. He's a character that can fit in almost any deck, but as more than a simple staple. He's a powerful win condition that will shape how the game is played based on his potential threat. And that's a card worth rooting for the top pick of Ursula's return. So now, what do you all think? Is Super Goof the hero of set 4, or will he actually be the meta-defining villain that everyone will soon be complaining about? Or perhaps I've misjudged his strength and you have a different number 1 card for set 4, maybe even a completely different top 10. Let me know your picks below, whether they're choices for the most broken new cards, or simply your favorite cards that you're most excited to play with going into set 4. Make sure to drop that comment and also subscribe if you haven't. I'm getting pretty close to 15,000 subscribers on the channel, which is wild. So I want to give a big thanks to everyone for all the support, and I'm just so excited for Lorcana Set 4 and beyond. Make sure to stay tuned for even more Ursula's Return content, but until then, peace.